This is the 8-9 combo. I'm Brett McKay. This is Harry Jones. Hello, mate. How are we doing for another week?
How's it, Brett? I've been thinking about kicking ass, kicking arse, all kinds of kicking. Though, is it the first thing people ever did that created a game? Maybe out there in the savannah, people running
So the
around,
story
just
goes.
a clump of dung running around and saying, "How far can I kick this?" Maybe even the foot wedge in golf. Those old shepherds in Scotland, maybe they were kicking that ball in there and pretending they putted it. I don't know, but we are all about kicking. There was a guy, an old guy, Afrikaans guy, commentating on radio, and this is back when you could create the drama of no one knew, there was no other way to find out what was happening between the Springboks and the All Blacks. And so what he would do is this clever little trick where he'd address the kick and the guy come up to the ball and hit it, and he'd say, "It's a mooi kick, prachtige kick, it's a beautiful kick, it's the best kick you've ever seen in your life, but it missed." That just to be a complete horse's arse. And that, I kind of missed that. I was like, that is really interesting, the drama you could build around a kick if you were the radio guy, because no one could guess what was happening. It was beautiful.
Yeah, that's fair. That's old school, but that's fair. It's episode 36 of the 8-9 Combo Rugby podcast already. And it's time to get into the rugby week, mate, with our cheers and jeers from the weekend. And I've got a good cheers for you. And it's all around the WXV tournament. It's congrats particularly to England, but especially Australia, taking out the WXV and the WXV2 titles, respectively, over the weekend. For the Wallaroos, it's their first major title in a good while, and obviously the first under the new coach, Joe Yap, as well, which secured Rugby World Cup qualification along the way, which is fantastic news for the Wallaroos. So congratulations to them. How are you going to bring me down now?
Oh, there's a lot of good matches this week. It was sort of Derby week, Inter-Pro week.
Yeah,
it was wonderful to see the different styles of rugby. I watched the MPC, which is so fun. It's just phase. Everyone looks like a hooker or a center or a flank. And I thought, well, maybe this is what World Rugby wants us to see. But I liked it, but there was a certain sameness to it. Then I crossed over and I see these bitter rivalries in the Premiership, and then I see the Irish going at it, and I see my coastal teams dying and the Highveld teams doing well. And the one moment that kind of was worth a jeer was Ben Earl in the London Derby when so Saracens come into the Stoop. Everyone's got their cranberry chinos on. They pulled up with their Lamborghinis. And Ben Earl, deep into the match, when it's clear that the Saracens are going to lose, like there's no doubt about it, a minor penalty is awarded to the Saracens. And Ben Earl, he's coming over, he's strutting, he's posturing. He didn't even have anything to do with the penalty. I'm like, dude, it's inversely proportional. Whenever you see Ben Earl celebrating, it's like he probably had nothing to do with it. The game was out of touch, or they were either winning or losing. I'm like, you've got to stop that.
I have never seen someone celebrate an opposition knock on as much as Ben Earl.
It's terrible.
It's just madness.
Oh, it was terrible.
It makes no sense.
So the Harlequins did kind of a parody of that, because at the very end there was something they did that did seal the match. I think Herbst, the big Safa lock, smashes someone into touch, and it basically sealed the deal. And then he stood and did his Ben Earl to the Stoop, and all the cranberry chinos arose.
How many Range Rovers must have been in that car park on Saturday?
That was actually a very good match to watch.
It was a good game. It was actually a really good game. Yeah, and we'll talk about it a little later. We have a very different kind of chat coming up next, and we suspect one that will get very technical very, very quickly on an area of the game that we all see, but perhaps we don't understand it as well as we think. It's up next. What am I doing?
No go.
Yep. Because we bring this guy in. Once again, I have a very excited co-host on hand for this week's guest, who Harry's been swapping messages with for some time now. So in this occasion, mate, I just hand over to you for intro duties. Fire away.
Far, far in the north of the Highveld, beyond the Highveld, where the Highveld turns into the Limpopo, and the beautiful region of South Africa, which is known by the people who live there as the most South African South Africa of all, is my friend and kicking god guru, Wihan van der Riet, which is, the Riet is by a cane, by the way, Brett, so that's basically van der Cane. Wihan van der Riet is a man who works with all kinds of people who need to kick in a game. It could be American football, it could be rugby, it could be any version of the football code. And so without further ado, Wihan, welcome to the 8-9 Combo Show to talk about kicking.
It's an incredible intro.
It's a hell of an intro.
Man, that's the best intro I've ever gotten. Thank you so much for having me. And Limpopo, it's the place to be. It is the most beautiful part of South Africa. So very fortunate to be here.
We've got to give you some massive credit straight off the bat here, Wihan. You're telling us that you live entirely off grid, but you are presenting some of the best internet connectivity that we have seen on this podcast. And we've had guests from everywhere around the world.
We've had guests from Palo Alto, and they have better internet connection. It's crazy.
Well, I live on top of a mountain, so I've got direct line of sight to the tower, which wasn't part of my plan, but it just kind of worked out that way. A lot of things that I do really well happen by accident most of the time.
No, that's probably for all of us. And do you create energy from kicking? Is that what you do? You're just kind of on a cycle. It's like a dynamo. You just keep kicking the ball. The more you kick, that's it.
Renewable energy.
If I had a nickel for every ball I kicked, I wouldn't have the challenges that I face right now. But no, it's all solar powered. Which is a challenge in the mountains when it's misty and so forth. But we live like it's 1655. So.
So nice. you run a thing called Rocketfoot Academy. We want to kind of get into you on all the facets of kicking. Brett's always been a kickologist for rugby. He keeps spreadsheets and likes to be able to know what's what. And you have a lot of misinformation around kicking in rugby. You know, people just say, well, it's decent enough. We kick 65%. You're like, no, that's way off what we want. There's also a lot of mechanics issues and people have their own pet theories. We've kind of worked through with you know, this art, this science of kicking. It's part art, part science, because no one has the perfection, right? But is it like golf, in that it doesn't really matter what your action looks like? It's just a matter of getting it over. So Jim Furyk's swing, which looks weird, you know, compared to Adam Scott's, it's okay. Or are there mechanics that you really need to obey in kicking?
Yeah, good question. I think it comes down to variables. And, you know, so some actions and some techniques have many more variables and requires you to be way more athletic to make the kick. And, you know, other methods like what we teach is a much more fluid method, and your body really wants to move that way. There's specific and significant reasons for that, and we'll get into that. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to how many variables you have to manage, how difficult it is to time up all of your movements, especially if they don't agree with one another. You know, if your momentum's moving in one direction, your swing's moving in another, and the target's in another, and you somehow have to make all of that work. It's a lot more difficult to do that. And so what we see at the top level, especially in rugby, and also now with the NFL, with kicking becoming a really high-paid job, it's no longer, you know, if you go back in the history of the NFL, it was always like the average athlete at school that would become the kicker, and he would have to learn really good technique to be able to perform at that elite level. And right now you're kind of seeing, if you look at kickers' techniques in the 80s and 90s, way better than what you see today. However, today you see way better athletes that are becoming kickers in the NFL. They're incredible athletes, and so I think you have to differentiate between kicking the ball athletically and kicking the ball with really good technique. And if you can make those two things meet, that's the potential that we have with guys like Mani and Sasha and Damien Willemse. These guys are incredible athletes that aren't utilizing the best mechanics to kick the ball, and they still somehow make it work from time to time, or more than make it work. But if you can take these guys that are incredible athletes and teach them really efficient and precise formulas to kick the ball, you're going to see stupendous results.
So do you liken yourself to a golf swing coach? More like, is that the obvious analogy?
Yeah, there's a lot of takeaways from golf. I think the clear difference is that when you're playing golf, you're in a stationary position. When you're kicking, you have to navigate yourself into the contact position, which makes kicking just on the surface a little more complex. Just looking at that fact itself, golf is way more difficult, of course. And
especially the way I play.
Yeah. I mean, I can drive the green, but I'll putt 12 times. You know, I've got no finesse whatsoever. So, but yeah, on the surface, it's very similar. It's understanding how to utilize your body to move your hands, and in a similar way, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have the body and the weight distribution and balance dictate the swing instead of the other way around. And I think what a lot of guys get wrong is they think the center of attention is on kicking the ball, and everything is sort of built around that. And what we've done is we've completely, how can I put, engineered it in a completely different way. So we pay much deeper attention to details such as your stride ratios, your tempo, your balance, your approach lines, plant foot location, and so forth. And the swing is just really born out of that. And it's kind of ironic because a lot of kicking coaches do teach a certain way to swing, and their entire methodology is built around that. However, what they don't really understand is that the swing is simply born out of what position your body's in, which is born out of how you ran. So it's a whole cause and effect movement. And if you don't set the gears in motion in the right way, then you could never produce the result that you are desiring at the ball. It's all built on top of one another. It's every movement is a catalyst for the next movement, and so on and so forth. And you really have very little control over what happens at the ball with the swing. It really is determined by what position you've put yourself in, what relationship you've created with the ball. And then that swing just kind of happens. And when we're coaching guys, the very first thing we do is we look at the follow through, because that to us is the result. It's the result of this preceding formula. And through just watching somebody's follow through, what their body does, where the swing goes, you can determine a whole bunch of things in their formula that went right or went wrong.
Yeah, that makes sense in a golf setting, right? So when I'm finishing in golf, I always think if my elbow is pointed where I wanted the ball to go, and I had a good strike, it always seems to be okay. Like that's where if I'm set at the end, my elbow usually is pointing exactly where the ball flight went. And if I can just remember how to get there, I think of two rugby kickers in South Africa. So one's Percy Montgomery and one's Morné Steyn, both accomplished kickers. But they had very different you said navigation. They had different ways of navigating themselves to the ball. Percy stripped it down at the end of his career where he didn't have one at all. And so he was like he was like a lever, he just
it was all like off one step, wasn't he?
One step, right? And it's almost like those guys who are kicking to touch right by the 5. They don't want to mess up. They just boil it down into I'm just
very controlled and minimalistic.
Right. And then Morné had actually a pretty long run up, but he did it. He says he imagined a plank, and that there's a plank laid down in front of the ball, and he kept almost tiptoes, almost like a ballerina. It was like almost almost delicate, but he wanted to make sure he was just going right down this thing. So two very different ways, but it made me think about your idea of navigating your way into the kick and the follow through.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million different ways to skin a cat, isn't there? And I can't speak on any of these guys. I mean, Morné Steyn was definitely one of my heroes growing up. Percy as well, although my dad didn't like him very much. He's a staunch Afrikaner. Couldn't understand why you would blow dry your hair before every game. But so it is what it is growing up in Limpopo. But not big Western Province fans. Let's just put it that way. Up here. So
I've chosen today's jersey. Well, haven't I?
Hey, look, I grew up in Victor Matfield's hometown. So I mean, that's and Dion Fourie. That's my claim to fame. So there's no other, there's no other options here. You are a Bulls fan, and that's it. So, but like I said, I can't speak for any of these guys. All I can say is, what I've learned over the past 10 years working with former NFL kicker Mike Hollis, who's an absolute legend. And he was coached by another guy. This is actually a third generation technique, if you were to put it like that, because he was coached in the 80s by a guy called Jim Gaetano. And Mike always says, like, he doesn't really know where Jim got all this stuff. Like, he's a little bit of a savant, like somebody that you just put piano and they can just play Beethoven. This guy just understands kicking somehow. It's just his weird talent that he has. And he taught Mike, and Mike played in the NFL. And he kicked in the NFL for 10 years. I mean, keeping your position for 2 years in the NFL is a huge thing. But, for 10 years as a kicker, very competitive. And, Mike would always say he's not a very big guy. He's 5'6", I think, 180 pounds. And he was able to kick at the elite level for 10 years. And he credits this all to his form and technique. Well, I think in 1998.
The thing about the NFL is you get fired for missing a kick. I mean, it's the most brutal, unforgiving. The percentage of made kicks is super high. So I was thinking about that before you came on. Is that mostly because it's in line? You never have to kick on an angle. You can always line up. So you've taken one, variable out.
Yeah.
But then you have other things against you, which you have people always charging you down pretty close to you, and you have to navigate the snap, the catch, and the place. That has to all be in line. And also compared to our shot clock, you don't have very much time at all. I mean, it's just snap and go. So why is the percentage so much higher? Is it a different ball to kick or what?
I think if you're a specialist in what you do, I mean, if you're a rugby player, you spend some time working on your kicking, but you've got other things that you need to do. And, having prepared for, playing American football and working out with professional teams and stuff, you do start to notice, especially as you get older, how wear and tear and fatigue can affect the way that you kick the ball. And so as a pro rugby player, you've got even more of that. As a professional kicker, you have to watch your kick count. But as a rugby player, how much can you really afford to work on your kicking, like quality-wise, if you've got all these other fitness things that you've got to do and conditioning and so forth? So it's definitely easier to become very good at kicking as a specialist, as an American football kicker, because that is literally all you do. So you spend a lot. It takes quite a special person you have to really be obsessed with what you're doing. And it's a lot of deep thinking about mechanics and technique and so forth. But the guys become very good at kicking because they've figured out how to kick very well with very good technique. Sorry.
So just thinking about that, to put it into terms that we would know in rugby, what are we talking about a success rate for an NFL kicker? Are we talking 95%? Is it higher than that even?
Yeah, the lower end of the spectrum is in the high 80s, so from 85 upwards, and then the really good. I mean, there was a guy that kicked in the CFL. He was in the Canadian Football League. A guy named Lewis Ward, who went 3 seasons without missing. I think it's 3 seasons. Yeah, 3 seasons without missing. And now your uninformed person would say, but they just kick straight and
they kick from 15 yards out every time.
But any good kicker or kicking coach will tell you that any successful kick is a straight line. Your target is just smaller. Whether you're kicking from the touch line or from right in front, the only difference is the size of your target. If you kick the ball straight, now sure, there's some sort of optical illusion for the lack of a better word, but you kind of you may feel as though you're kicking from an angle, and because of the way that the uprights look to you. But it's just a smaller target. That's all it is. The real difficulty with kicking a football, especially at the elite level, is the fact that you're kicking the ball off the ground. Now, this is a double-edged sword. It both challenges you immensely, but it also teaches you to solve problems that a kicking tee solves for you. And both of you, if you play golf, you would know this. You'd understand this comparison. If you go to the driving range and you take out your driver, you put it on a tee, you can smoke that ball to 250 meters. You're an amateur. But then I give you a 3-iron and put the ball on the ground. It's a lot more difficult to hit a flush shot, right? You're going to duff a whole bunch of balls before you eventually hit it. So the margin for error is way smaller, and the precision required is a lot greater. So that's one of the difficulties. And then, of course, you're in full kit, which is awkward. You're wearing a helmet and pads and stuff. It's not great to kick that way. And then lastly, you've got this entire operation. So it's really not you. It's not just you kicking the ball. You've got a snapper that snaps the ball to a holder. The holder holds the ball for you, hopefully in the right position. And then from the minute the ball is snapped, you've got about, on average, 1.3 seconds from the minute the ball snapped to actually kick the ball. So everything is sort of happening sort of towards one another. You're sort of approaching a ball that's not really there just yet. And all you really have is trust in your mechanics. And hopefully the holder puts the ball in the right place and everything aligns correctly. And this is a repetitive thing that just, these guys work on it all the time and they get very good at it. And, so that answers the question. Kicking the ball off the ground will teach you things that kicking off a tee will never teach you. It will never teach you that, because you'll never have to solve the problems, especially at the elite level of kicking footballs, to kick the ball at the correct trajectory so it doesn't get blocked, with good ball speed, good rotation, good direction, and a lot of distance. There's a lot that goes into it, a lot of detail that goes into it.
Are rugby tees too high, in your opinion? Sometimes they look extraordinarily high to me. You're having to do a very unnatural motion.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my biggest pet peeves, is when I see kids and even professionals come to a field and they've got a kicking tee that's so high. What this inadvertently does is they think it is it's like a cheat code almost. That's what they think it is. But what it really does is a kicker that uses a higher kicking tee can never be balanced. And there's a very specific reason for that. The higher the ball is elevated from the ground, the nearer to the tee the plant foot has to land, because what then happens is, as your body leans off to the left, your kicking foot is raised. And so you have to be off balance in order to get your foot into the correct plane to kick the ball.
Yeah.
And so what happens? Are they doing that to kick up? Is that what they're trying to achieve?
Well, if you are totally balanced, let's say I'm totally level, totally balanced, naturally my plant foot is going to land wide. The heel of my plant foot, whatever line that is, let's call it just the line running from my heel, just parallel from my heel. Yeah. That is going to be, if I'm totally balanced, that's going to be the lowest point my kicking foot is going to be in the swing path. Okay. And that's where I want to make contact with the ball. So if I'm planted and I'm balanced and my ball is on a high tee, if I'm balanced, I'm going right underneath that tee. Right underneath the ball. I'm going to kick the tee. So in order for me to kick the ball, I need that foot to be up into the swing path by the time I get to the ball. So that forces me to get my plant foot, and this happens subconsciously, but it forced me to get my plant foot nearer to the ball. So I'm leaning off to the left. So I'm raising my hip and then my leg and then my foot in the swing path. And so guys that kick off a higher tee are just naturally unbalanced. They can never be balanced because they'll always undercut the ball.
So Damien McKenzie, Harry, I don't know if you've noticed this, he brings out a tee and he actually extends it.
Yeah.
So it's a rubber tee and then he extends it. It probably goes, I don't know, maybe 1.5 inches. It lifts. So his ball is sitting really high compared to the other seat.
I mean, that's why he smiles so much, man. He knows.
Look, and again, like I said at the start, like you can make that work. It depends on how athletic you are. I mean, of course, he's a very athletic guy. So I mean, it's like an athletic act for him to kick the ball, and of course, he's done it so many times that it becomes repeatable. But there are just ways to do it where there's so little variables. It's so smooth and it's so fluid. And it's so effortless.
Is that the reason that we went to kicking tees rather than
build the sand
buckets of sand, or heel into the ground and just plonk the ball straight down? Did we go to a tee so that was one variable removed? It was always going to be the same height all the time.
I mean, I suppose that could have been the thinking. Maybe I could have been climate activists that said we can't keep taking sand from the beaches. But my bet is on the latter. So I think it's a game of precision, isn't it? You want the ball in the same position every single time so that your technique meets the ball at in the same position every time.
I feel like kicking tees became a thing in about the early 90s. Was kicking tees was it pre-professional or was it a professional era thing?
No, it was. I think it was right around professional era. If you go back and look at some games in the early 90s and mid 90s, people are still building the sand mountain.
Still sand
castles. There was even a holdout. There was a guy who, like, long after everyone changed the tees, he's like still had his thing. And the thing about building that, just it made me think of this, Wihan, is we had a certain art to building it. Everyone had their own. It's like making a braai, that's not the way you do it. So there was like this idea of doing like a little slope, and other people actually did almost like a cone. Other people had like a volcano, and they would dig a hole in the middle and put the ball in. I only kicked for one season because our guy was out. Uwe, the big German, was out, and so I remember kicking, and we're in the Newlands area, and a mom was heckling. Like a mother on our team, mother of another boy, was heckling me every single kick. Ach no, Harry, that's terrible. And I was thinking,
that's right.
I was obsessed on building the little mountain. I was like, maybe I'm not doing the right mountain. But when you go out with an actual modern tee and do it, as I have recently, it's just unnatural feeling. You have to set
I hope the photographer got vision of this.
I did actually, always.
Yeah, we want to see a video. Otherwise,
it's so unnatural. You have to really like you said, you have to calibrate your whole body, and it doesn't feel right. It would take me ages, I think, to get used to not being able to sort of, come through and scuff the ground, scuff the dirt. Instead, you're up, you're this much higher than the dirt. It's weird.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing there is that, of course, kicking techniques change. The old leather boot, the old leather ball, for a long time was kicked dead in line. It was toe poking. And then the around the corner kickers came in. The ball was very upright. Then we started standing it over a bit, and then we go to the synthetic ball, which has got a completely different sort of sweet spot. So the whole game has changed.
It's fascinating. You still see so much diversity though. Like taking the Bok kickers right now, Lebok, Sasha, Pollard.
I was going to get into this.
If you don't see the guy, but you see the ball flight, I know which one's Pollard's because it's more like a 4-iron. He actually doesn't get
He's very low
height on it, whereas Mani always goes so high, like over the actual poles. And I was wondering about that in a golf analogy again. We keep coming back to golf, sorry, but it's like the more height you put on your shot, the more variables there are for it to go wrong. It's in the air longer, and you have the more the wind, you have more shift. And the idea of kicking a nice low bullet into the wind does appeal to me. Is that fair, or is it better to go high?
Yeah, so I don't know if you ever played TV games when you were a kid, but do you remember there was like an athletic Olympics game on like a Sega game set where you could throw a javelin, and the only way you could throw the javelin for a world record was to release that javelin at exactly 45 degrees. Okay. And the reason why 45 degrees is perfect is because it's exactly half of your 180-degree horizon that you're kicking into. So that's essentially what we're aiming to teach our kickers. And so the question is, how do we achieve that? Well, it's more to do with your body position at impact than anything else, because again, that body position is dictating the swing path itself. So high, low, 45 degrees is perfect. Anything above that is it's a little too much loft. And then anything below that is not going to have a lot of carry. So
we're gonna try and do something here. Brett and Wihan are definitely my superiors on tech, but we're gonna try and show a few things on our video show. I'll
actually start here, Wihan, and then because I've got a question to ask based on a couple of photos that you've sent us, and then I've got the Gilbert at hand here, so I want to ask a couple of questions on that as well. So if you are listening to us on our podcast, we are about to start talking through some photos and things like that. So this is one of these podcasts where we absolutely recommend that you kind of go to the YouTube channel and see what we're talking about, because there is going to be moments in this where we inevitably forget that we are talking to a photo and that you won't be able to actually see what we're talking about. So bear with us on that. But absolutely recommend that everyone heads to our YouTube channel for this chat. So let's see if I can make this work. I'm going to show a photo that you sent, a photo that I actually sent through that you sent through a couple of photos for us, Wihan, and I've sort of meshed one together in particular. Now, if you guys are seeing that, it's 3 photos that I've put together. On the very left is an NFL kicker. I think it's actually that's your boot, isn't it, Wihan? Kicking
that's me. Yeah,
there's a shot in the middle of Damien Willemser, and then Mani Libok on the far right there. And so I've put those 3 photos together, particularly to talk about the differences in the sweet spot in a ball. And so an NFL ball, obviously, you can see that in this photo. The NFL ball you're kicking, I would say, just below halfway, but you're kicking the lower belly of the ball, I would say. Whereas a rugby kicker kicking a Gilbert is very much trying to kick to the end of it. So my question in all that, I suppose, is there's obviously different balls have different sweet spots. So if I'm holding the ball up fairly upright here, in an NFL style, you're hitting it fairly flat on there, fairly upright, but fairly low on the flat. Whereas rugby kickers are trying to hit an angle there, aren't they? That's loosely what I've hit. They're trying to hit the end of the balls where the sweet spot is in the Gilbert.
And for our audio listeners, Brett was pointing at a place like Australia for the NFL, and then South Pole for rugby kickers.
Yes, South Pole, but with the Earth on its axis. Yes, that's right.
Yes. All right. So yeah, I mean, rugby players make up for poor body position at impact with the angle of the ball. So if your weight is in front of the ball,
that's my next question.
and you can't manufacture. Yeah, so if you can't manufacture the angle with your body and dictate an upswing, I think my camera froze here. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, but you still hear you though. Yeah,
No, you're all good. You're all good.
Should I just try to reset it?
No.
Keep going. It'll come back, I think.
So yeah, sorry about that. So if your body weight is forward, which a lot of kickers, rugby kickers specifically, have their body in front of the ball, or at least their weight forward, and the angle of the body is forward, this does not produce an upswing. So a lot of them are trying to make up for that with the angle of the ball, so that when they strike the ball on that point, it will, to a large degree, follow the angle of the ball itself. Whereas what we teach with ProForm is the body angle that you create at impact is the loft of your club. It's the loft of your club head, and that is producing the upswing. So I can then have the ball standing vertical, and I can hit literally the middle of the ball where there's all the compression in the world. And I can kick that ball with all that compression with my entire foot. Actually, my entire body is kicking the ball, but to a large degree, my whole foot is hitting the whole ball, mostly on the inside panel. But then, as a result of the length of my foot, I'm making contact with most of the back of the ball. And this it just produces for me a way sweeter feel on the foot. It just kicks the ball way better. I get way better response from the ball. The ball has certain elasticity that gives you some feedback on your foot, and I've never liked the feel of the point of the ball. So
is that the sweet spot of the rugby? Is the sweet spot actually more like the equator and not the bottom of the ball?
Yeah. If you think about kicking a torpedo, where would you hit the ball?
Yeah, you'd be wanting to sort of hit. I'm trying to get this in. You'd probably trying to hit, bottom, like you said, Harry, about Australia on a globe.
Yeah,
is where you're trying to hit. Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's interesting, because we've heard for years and years that the sweet spot of the synthetic rugby ball, particularly, has actually changed to the bottom. And that's why we started leaning balls forward, we were told, because the sweet spot was actually at the bottom, and that was where you then had momentum going through the ball as well. So, I mean, I'm very quickly getting out of my depth because I didn't kick much at all, I must admit. So,
well, you saw the thing about keeping your head down. Like Patrick Lambie talked about this, that he never looked up, even on the kick where he beat the All Blacks with. He didn't even see the result because he was so studious at keeping his head down through contact. So that's something you said really makes sense to me, is that so many rugby kickers are taught you've got to keep your body over the ball, and your head actually precedes the strike. But what you're saying is that actually is working against us sometimes, because we need to get the loft. You've got to get the ball online as quickly as possible and stay online.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. This camera of mine, don't know why it's doing
this.
No,
you're good. No, you're good. No, you're good. You're good to keep going.
It must be the FBI that's hearing all the secrets. They're trying to hack us here. So
it's the goal kickers union is
the Argentinians. I'm sure
they've dropped in and they're going. So another question then, similar to do with.
Well, I'm just going to leave the camera off because it just seems like it's just lagging.
That's fine.
No problems. We'll make it work. It's not going to look quite as good on our YouTube channel. I was saying before how we used to start with the ball. We used to start with the ball very, very upright, but we've now gone to the ball more of an angle. And so I was looking through some pictures today, leading into tonight, and Johnny Wilkinson, for example, his ball was, I would say, maybe 85 degrees. It wasn't quite 90, but it was very upright, and he used to hit that sort of low bottom, sort of that. Where am I seeing it? Basically, the T on the Gilbert there, as you can see it. And for our podcast listeners, if you can sort of stand a ball up at 90 degrees, tilt it forward a little bit, Johnny Wilkinson had it very, 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 very upright. The modern kickers have got them almost laying, I would say, at 45 degrees. Most of them, they're very much leaning over like that. There's a few that still stand them up. Andre Pollard, I think he stands it a little bit more upright, but most kickers these days have got it sitting on a tee.
Johnny Sexton also did that. He was a little bit more upright.
Yeah. Most kickers now, certainly all the younger kickers, they've got it sitting on a tee like that at about 45 degrees. It's almost like they're using the side seam as a 45-degree guide, if you like, Wihan. Like that's the line they want to launch at, so they just kick through that line.
Yeah, but look at their body position. That is the loft of the club, right? Yeah. So it doesn't matter how you set up the golf ball. If you're hitting it with a driver, you're hitting it with a driver. You could lean the ball back and you can lean it forward. It doesn't matter because the club is hitting the ball and the club face is doing the work. And so your body position is that club face. I'm not taking it again. I can only speak for what we teach and what I do.
Yeah, of course.
And what I've learned. But I want to kick. Here's my takeaway on this. I want to kick the whole ball, most of the ball, with my entire body, with all of my weight behind the ball, in motion. So that requires me to limit my backswing so that when I land on the plant foot, I can kick the ball almost instantaneously. Because if I don't do that, then that optimal body position that I've created through my approach, through the way in which I'm running, actually, my running mechanics create the body position. And then if I land on the plant foot and I have this very exaggerated backswing, all that's happening is I'm waiting for that kicking foot and my body position is simply breaking down. So in order to put all of this potential energy that I'm generating in the approach, my body momentum, to get that, and all the coaches talk about body momentum, but they also talk about bigger backswing. You can't have both. It's just it's counterintuitive. So in order to get all of that body momentum into the ball, I have to be at the correct angle with my body, and I have to kick the ball as quickly as possible. So I have to limit the backswing. And also I've got to marry my swing path and the direction of my momentum. Those two things have to marry. It doesn't help I run in one direction and swing in another. You understand what I'm trying to get at?
I do.
Also, are you also creating more velocity? I mean, basically, that sounds like more of a rocket, more of an actual speed, because the sooner you can get the ball online as quick as possible, then it's going to be more accurate. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, your ultimate source of power is your body weight and momentum. And that's what we're effectively, the leg is simply the mechanism that transfers that body momentum into the ball. So it's extremely important to understand exactly where to run, because if you're not running into the correct space, you're always going to run out of space, or you're always going to be too far and have to get into a position to reach at the ball, to find the ball at some point. So it's really important to understand exactly where your approach paths should be. Most guys that I see are running too narrow to the ball, and then they're trying to solve that problem at the ball. And they think that's the way that they're swinging, but they're swinging that way because they're having to solve the problem of running out of space. Yeah. So they're trying to get out of the way.
So by getting out at the very end, they collapse, kind of.
Yeah. Exactly. So and then everything goes out the window. So picture this. This is the way that I always describe this opportunity that you have as a goal kicker. When you have the ball in your hand and you're going to punt it, you can take that ball and place it into a position relative to your kicking leg where you can swing forward with your quad and not have to change direction to kick the ball. You can do that because you have the ball in your hand. When you're approaching the ball and it's on the ground or on a tee, you have the same opportunity, except that you're placing the ball in that position based on where you're running and what relationship you're creating with the ball. The ball, and the second, like, to build on that, the ball is the target. We're trying to kick the ball primarily, and then the rotation will naturally happen. So just like a golf swing, when you get to the bottom of your swing, the last thing you want to do is think about rotating and turning towards where you and guiding and steering the ball.
Nothing in your brain. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you just let your swing happen, your body naturally rotates. And the same thing happens when you kick a ball. If you do what I'm telling you to do, if you run down your approach line and you swing at the ball as though it's the target, and for right-footed kickers, the target always feels like it's to your left because of the way that you've lined up. The temptation is to turn and try to steer and guide the ball in that direction. But in doing so, all you're doing is you're relocating the ball relative to you. So as you're turning, the ball is more and more to your right, and you have to go and reach for it. But what actually happens if you swing forward with a punt swing, like I teach it, you're swinging at the ball, you're landing on a plant foot, half of your body is decelerating naturally, that's causing the leverage, while the other half is accelerating naturally because of the swing, and that causes a natural rotation. So you never, and this is the most mind-blowing thing about ProForm kicking, is that you never have to change direction before you've gotten to the ball. The way in which you line up, if you've lined up correctly, the ball's in a certain location, all you have to do is run straight, and this sounds easy. It's a little challenging because you have habits and temptations, but you run straight and swing at the ball as though it's the target, and your rotation will happen naturally. And the less you can turn before you get to the ball, the more potential you get into the ball.
Gotcha.
And so it's all about just understanding that these natural mechanics it's going to take place, it's going to happen.
So
because it's interesting to see.
Show us some pictures. Sorry, Brett. Show us some pictures about this, and let's walk through it for them.
Do we want to tempt fate on this, or might this bring us undone again? I'm actually just wondering about this. I'm just wondering about this.
It seems like my camera's working again, but let me get some pictures ready.
Yeah, and we'll talk to you while you're doing it.
While you're setting that up, so what I'm seeing from your vision of your NFL kicking, your approach is very straight. It's certainly not a 45-degree angle. It is fairly straight running in. We see a lot of rugby goal kickers are coming in almost closer to 90 degrees than like they're almost perpendicular to the ball rather than even 45 degrees. So they're almost their kicking foot is then sort of swinging right around themselves, and a lot haven't even got into the idea of putting swing on the ball. Where the guys try to do it, where they do it automatically and they're overcorrecting.
Yeah, like a soccer free kick, like a free kick in soccer often is, because they disguise where it's going. They want to bend it a lot. They come really 90 degrees.
Yeah. Wihan, I've got a bad feeling about your camera and our ability to share this. That's not going to bring you undone. So
I'm so sorry about this camera situation.
No. Look, I think we might.
I want to address.
I think we might have abandoned the idea I think we might have abandoned the idea to share some things.
I think it's just a camera issue, but I want to just address what you were talking about, making your angle sharper. All of those things a lot of these guys are trying to treat the symptoms of this premature voluntary rotation that they're bringing into their action, because they think the target is off to the left, so they think they have to guide and steer it there. And so in order to compensate for all of this lateral rotation, they just keep making their angle wider and wider.
Yep.
And if you just keep doing that, you'll eventually end up on the other side of the ball. Like,
I want to see that.
The line, right?
Yeah.
We're still going to see that if these guys continue.
While you're talking there, I'm just going to pop this that photo that I shared there just before. I'm just going to pop that up again.
Romani is going really wide.
Yeah. So you can see in that. So Damien Willemser is very upright. What is interesting there is that they're using the same tee. So the ball is the same sort of height. Willemser is very upright, and his body is very upright in the picture as well. And again, our podcast listeners, this is one that you might have to actually just jump onto our YouTube channel and actually see what we're talking about. The picture on the far right is Mani Libok. His body is at almost 45 degrees, as is the ball. And so what you're saying, Wihan, is that he's in that position because of his approach to the ball, and he's overcompensating with the ball angle as well.
There's a million reasons why he could be in this position, and both of them have a very narrow plant foot. So the difference between the two of them is Damien somehow is able to stay a little more balanced, even though, like, you have to understand the difference between achieving balance and being naturally balanced. And so what I would like to see is a wider plant foot, because that creates a naturally balanced platform. But Damien's somehow gotten himself to be a little more balanced in the kick. Whereas Marnie's angle is so wide. You know, again, I mentioned it earlier, he's approaching basically directly at the ball. And then at the last second, and I've watched these films so many times, I really want to help, but he's trying to get out of the way. He's in his own way at the ball, at the most crucial point of the kick. He's all the movement actually happens. All this lateral movement happens at the ball, which is the last thing that you want at the ball. You want minimal movement at the ball. Actually, through the whole approach, you all you need to really do is line up correctly and never move again, except forward and linearly. And the opportunity is there. So Marnie's getting out of the way. But what tends to happen with kickers that approach too narrow to the ball, as they're getting out of the way, what ends up happening is the torso gets out of the way, but the plant foot creeps in. It comes into the ball. You see this very narrow plant foot with a body that's super, like, leaning very much to the left. And this reinforces this lateral swing. All that this is doing is that it gives him no option to swing forward with the quad. His entire body, everything wants to fall left. Everything is going to rotate and turn. And that's another way he's staying balanced. That's the only way he's not falling over is by rotating his hips and getting out of this position as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I would snap a knee ligament in that position. It's like so much,
but again,
so much pressure on his lower limb. The second thing I think about, there's 1,000 athletic adjustments he's making in infinitesimal seconds inside his head, and because he's such a super athlete, he can do it. The third thing is that's too many things in your brain. Like, I want to have very few things in my brain when I want to kick to win in Argentina, to win the rugby championship. I don't want to think about, oh no, I got to do this and that.
Well, so the other thing that I'm noticing there is that Marnie's head positioning relative to Damien Willemsen.
Sideways.
Again, Damien is very upright, so his head is pretty well straight down over the ball. Marnie is, being a distance away from the ball. His head is at a similar angle to the way he's got the ball set up on the tee. He's almost at 45 degrees with the rest of his body.
Yeah. This is the symptom. I mean, if you've got a ailment or something like that, you could show different symptoms than somebody else. And this is the same thing here. These guys are trying to solve a problem that they think exists, which is the target is off to my left, and I somehow need to make the ball go left. But they are creating the problem. And I don't want to spend my time on here criticizing other people, but this is why these techniques look this way, because they think they have to steer the ball to the left, which is where the target is. And in doing so, they're creating the problem they think that they're solving. It's a complete counterintuitive way of thinking. And so, if I get to work with whether it's primary school kids or high school kids or pros or whatever, the very first thing we need to establish with these guys is that the ball is the target and the goalposts are the result. And you have to treat the ball as the target. And there's several reasons for it. But I mentioned earlier that the more and more you turn before you get to the ball, the more and more the ball's to your right, the more and more you have to fetch it, the more and more you have to rotate to make it go where you want it to. So inadvertently, by rotating, it becomes harder to get the ball to go to the target. The more you rely on your own natural rotation, your own biomechanics to make that rotation happen based on that deceleration on the left-hand side, acceleration on the right-hand side, the more natural and fluid this is. And it becomes so effortless to kick a ball. It is actually so simple.
So what you're trying to say is that if you stop moving, the ball's where you need it.
Exactly. So here's the mind-blowing thing. Guys, the amount of times Mike Hollis blew my mind with with ProForm philosophy, like how ProForm works. It's so incredible. There's so much depth to this technique, and I'll go into it. But I'm warning you. I warned you prior. But
you know what? Let's maybe put a pin in it, and this will be a reason to get you back on another day, because we could really go down a rabbit hole here.
And I want to talk about time as well. So we have the advent of the shot clock. And although it doesn't replicate, like you said, in the NFL, you have the 1.3 seconds. There is this idea of managing it. And so some of the kickers who are struggling at 60, 65% instead of the requisite 80% for rugby, 75 to 80, they seem to have piled more stress on themselves on the shot clock, when actually, in a way, by having a defined period, you should be able to manage it. It's a controllable thing, right? It's like the tennis serve. When you see that, I've read things in golf that the longer you stand over the tee, actually, the worse it becomes because of stored lactic acid, because of thoughts in your head. What if I miss? What if I shank this? You should have a routine that is more like 10 to 15 seconds. You don't want to have 45-second routine.
No, absolutely not.
Is that what you're finding with your guys, that you have better results if you can have a little, preset thing and then go?
Yeah, exactly. Your body memory, for the lack of a better way to describe it, and your subconscious mind, they're enemies. You want to keep them as far away from one another as possible. And so once you've embedded these mechanics into your muscle memory, you want your body to just do it and just let it happen. Now, look, it's easier said than done. And I found that, somebody like me with severe ADHD and just a natural overthinking mind, although it makes me a great coach, does not make me the best performing kicker, right? My coach always used to tell me, just like, you should just stop thinking about it so much. Like, but it's impossible, Mike. I have to think about every single movement here. And so, but what are you thinking about? You've done this a million times, and I guess if there's a million variables in your process, then there's a lot to think about. But if you simplify your entire process and you eliminate those variables, all you really need is a moment to take your breath, slow your heart rate down, and then just let it happen. Let it happen. And if you're waiting for that cue, we always talk about the flow state and how do you get into that moment. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. But maybe we'll talk about that in another year or two's time.
Yeah, Johnny Wilkinson talked about having one clear moment, and he would pick out a guy in the crowd, and he would say, he had tremendous ball striking, so he followed your adage of like the ball's the target. But he also had this other thing where he goes, and I want the ball to hit that guy in the red hoodie, and he would literally aim for one guy, which is interesting because what you're saying is you should always be hitting the ball straight to the target instead of saying, I'm going to bend it around. Then you have players like, Brett knows him really well, Christian Leafano, who had such a draw on his ball that he had to play it. I mean, he would line up about 20 meters to the right and trust it.
You guys may not know, Jonathan Thurston was a really good goal kicker.
I know
in Rugby League. His setup was such, and again, he laid the ball right down low. Yeah,
this guy was aiming.
He was aiming almost 45 degrees to the right so that he could bring it around. Like it was
but he was confident, right? He knew.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, you could always say, look, each to his own. That's fine. And again, there are thousands of different ways to kick a ball, and some guys make it work. You can go down a list of countless successful kickers. Dan Carter. I mean, if you break down his technique, not the most efficient way to kick a ball, but only Dan Carter can do that. No one else can do that. No one else. And I've seen
he was another one he stood the ball up fairly straight as well. I noticed in photos.
But he had a very narrow plant foot, a lot of lateral rotation, not a very tall body to kick the ball out of, forward body weight, but incredible athlete. I mean, who can deny that? Right? It's incredible athlete. And again, if you do something over and over and over again, you're gonna figure out how to do it, how to make it work. Not necessarily and what you make up, like what Dan Carter did in comparison to maybe what Marnie did as a child or as a young boy, figuring out how to kick a ball. Those two things are not always equal. Maybe, Dan's way is maybe, just a little more effective than what Marnie's is. But ProForm's different. It's a blueprint to kicking. It's not like there's no guesswork. Every single thing has an answer. Every single movement, every mechanic, every little thing that you do.
Yeah. So and Wihan, I think of the practical impact would be like on a club level in juniors, in the young guys playing. If you can have like this kind of technique and you can this kind of thought process, the standard of kicking from the bottom will be raised. Like we just talked about how the NFL acceptable kicking rates 90%.
Yeah.
Given that rugby is so dependent on the boot for scoring, because I think Brett told me before we went on, like 65% of our points pretty much come from the tee. No matter what, this is such a sea change. If your team, if your kicker, if your young guys can hit 80, 85, 90%, that's such a point of difference. And we've had this kind of acceptance of 65, 70% for a lot of teams. It's actually quite low when you think
very low.
The Super Rugby average for the last for as long as I've been keeping records, is about 74-75%. And so this was actually the question I was deliberately going to save till last. If, generally speaking, or the accepted way of thinking in rugby is that anyone who can kick above 80% is elite. Anyone that's kicking more than 8 out of 10, more than 16 out of 20, 80 out of 100, that is elite level kicking. And, just this year just gone, Damien McKenzie kicked at 87% in Super Rugby Pacific. Noah Lolosio was at 85%. And they were both considered to have had exceptional years of goal kicking from the tee. So the question to leave us on for this, and it's been a great chat, is how good do you think rugby kickers could become? Do you see rugby kickers ever getting to 85 to 90% as a norm, or is the margin for error too much?
It will definitely depend. I think it's going to be a combination of a lot of things have to change in the industry. I think it's very difficult from my perspective. If you ask me, I would say if you teach these guys ProForm fundamentals, the sky's the limit. Then it's going to be a question of who is better at ProForm. That's going to be the ultimate question, because ProForm is the truth. It is. I know it's the truth. I know it with I believe it with everything.
Would it require a kicking coach on most teams, like an actual dedicated goal kicking coach, like as you would have in some of the specialist sports?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that even in the NFL teams don't have kicking coaches, because you I mean, you get signed to a team, you got there somehow. And with your form, your technique, whatever, you can't have a guy teaching you other things, And I think maybe that's part of the problem with rugby goal kicking coaches at franchises and things like that. I think this sort of thing has to be. Look, it's not impossible. And here, I think here's the takeaway here. It's not impossible for a guy like Mani, who's obviously we know that he's struggling a little bit with his goal kicking and so forth, for him to overhaul his technique. Sure. But that's going to require some sort of a sacrifice where, for a season he doesn't kick.
Right.
It's not going to be. I would not advise him learning this and kicking simultaneously. If you think they want his head now, the public's going to want his head on a platter if he continues to kick while learning this. But to overhaul his technique, it's absolutely possible. He's a great athlete and he can do it. But ideally, this sort of thing is installed at junior level. Yeah. And I think one of the problems is that as the rugby industry, as it works, I've noticed, if you were a Springbok or a professional player of some sort, then it's not about like you're great at what you do, right? But is it because you have great technique, or is it because you're a great athlete? And
sometimes it's despite your technique. Like you're so athletic that you can overcome it.
Exactly. Even despite your technique. So then you get the opportunities to coach, and you're coaching what worked for you despite your technique to others, to the young generation, and so forth. And it's just continued and continued and continued.
And then you end up it's a bigger point about coaches. Sometimes the best coaches were not that great players, and it's because they had such amazing technique, or they studied the game so well that they were able to rise above. But I was thinking, like, are there any teams? I thought the Wallabies had for a while a dedicated kicking coach, but maybe teams don't have a dedicated kicking coach.
The Wallabies used Bram van Straten for a number of years, but he was very much a consultant coach who would do one session a week or one session or a couple of days leading into a tournament. He was never part of it.
It's almost baffling because of the percentage of points that come from the team that we don't have someone telling you how to kick. Yeah,
it is.
That could be
Wihan. So I was just gonna wrap up. You feel like you're going to make one last point, though?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think it's definitely a beneficial thing to have if the guy knows what he's doing, and if the kickers are, if they're willing to make the sacrifice because me, it does make sense if you're, and I've seen this, I've been out there, I've seen this. People just say things. They just regurgitate what they see on YouTube and what some other professional guys said, and then they become kicking coaches, and then they know somebody who knows somebody, and then they coach for a team. It's an unfortunate situation that the industry is sort of built like that. Like it's more a who you know kind of business. But if you have a guy who, I'm a full-time professional coach. I've been this for 10 years. I've dedicated my life to this. I'm not somebody that, I think about this all the time. I do it all the time. I coach it all the time. That would be the right time. I'm not saying give me a job. I'm just saying that would be the right type of coach to do this, because over 10 years, you develop a system. You have a system and it works, and you see what hasn't worked. You know how to coach it. You know what kids struggle with. I mean, I've worked with hundreds of kids overseas, online, in person. Like, I know how to coach it. I know what works. I myself struggled with this for the best part of 6 years to master it. I know every single bad habit. I know exactly what's going on in your mind, and like you said, the best coaches aren't always the best players. And that's exactly in my case. I'm that guy. So
if people want to find out more about, you've mentioned this ProForm technique a bit. If people want to find out more about that and what you can do and all that, if they want to find out more about Rocketfoot Academy, is there a website? There's the social media handles you want to drop now that we can post it on our notes as well.
Yeah, you can check out my Facebook page, Rocketfoot Academy. I'm on Instagram at Rocketfoot. I'm on Twitter at Rocketfoot. So all those social media.
No worries at all. It's been a genuinely fascinating chat, mate. We might have put the mockers on your internet capability early on, and we might have tried to. We might have actually found the limitations of it. But look, it's been a really, really interesting chat, a really interesting conversation. And so, thanks so much for bringing a real technical conversation to the podcast. It's been a treat.
Definitely, and also I'm going to watch kicking differently now. Like literally this next weekend,
absolutely,
I'm going to watch the approach and everything and be thinking about you. So thanks a lot for.
Hey, listen, once that ProForm bug bites you, you'll never look at kicking the same way again. There's no going back. So sorry about that. But
we're just going to be all about approach angles and plant foot space.
But thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to talking some more and breaking down some more kicking and delving even more deeper into ProForm technique. I can't wait.
Yeah. Sounds good, man. Cheers.
This is the 8-9 Combo Rugby Podcast with Brett McKay and Harry Jones, and mate, that was a very, very interesting chat. Great to get right into the weeds about goal kicking with Wihan Fundarit. That was fascinating, in fact.
The magical mystery world of kicking. There's so many nuances. You talk to someone who actually does this. Like I did it for a season, and I remember thinking that I would obsess on it. I would wake up thinking about it because I think it's so much pressure. It's the one moment in rugby where the team sport turns into an individual sport in one moment, and suddenly it's just a guy with his tee and a ball, and that's it.
So when you were doing it, were you kicking around the corner, or were you kicking straight on toe poking like I was talking about?
About 45 degrees. I would take I would step back about 4 or 5, and then I would take that one extra back right before I went, like some kickers do.
Yeah,
it just set me. And then I always just tried to focus in a weird way. I tried to focus on the strike. Once I lined myself up, I forbade myself from looking at the poles again. I would just focus on my strike, and then I had a pretty decent outcome.
Yeah,
I think where it was touchline conversions, I was just a hope and a prayer. Like I viewed it. I took all pressure off me. I was like, it's 50-50. Yeah.
The interesting thing in all this is that Wihan is saying that there is so much information out there about goal kicking. Go and watch it. Go and watch clips and see it, and you will find the right things. Your average golf coach will say, "Don't look at YouTube. YouTube will ruin your swing."
Interesting.
So he's actually saying the opposite. Go and find the information.
But the exponential amount of golf swing stuff out there is just ridiculous.
Oh, it's phenomenal, isn't it? Yeah, it's absolutely. And of course, they'll all fix your swing in 30 balls or whatever it is. So
right.
Anyway, a quick whip around the grounds, mate. It was a busy weekend of rugby, and it's becoming busier. Even without Test rugby, and we mentioned the WXV series wrapping up as well. There was still a fair bit happened around the rugby world. It was round 4 of the URC. Leinster remain unbeaten in the ERC, and they sit 4 points clear on top after their win over Munster at Croke Park. A record URC crowd. It was a really interesting game. And there were times where I thought, oh, Munster's coming back into this. This is going to be a real contest. And then I realised that you are just mounting up phase after phase after phase against the Irish defence system.
Exactly. It's just Ireland plus RG.
Yeah, pretty much. So it was, it was incredible. I'm so glad I got up to watch it in the early hours of Sunday morning, my time. 80,400 or something like that. That is a massive crowd.
Rugby this weekend, it was insane. There was just so many good matches all around the parks. I loved it. URC was it was a terrible thing for me with my Stormers, but well,
I was gonna get to that. So Glasgow holds second after a big win over Zebre. The Bulls survived a harsh red card, I've got to say, to David Creel to beat Ospreys. But they're now 4th because the Lions are now the best team in South Africa after holding out the Dragons in Newport. Edinburgh beat the Stormers 38-7, so I presume the ERC is not happening. And does this mean I'm not wearing this jersey?
No, it is. We have to accept the ERC. Yeah, there's no way. I cannot fictitiously make it go away. We're struggling. John Dobson needs to go away and get some new ideas. We just seem to be doing the same thing and it doesn't work anymore.
Am I wearing this jersey, or am I sitting here very uncomfortable for the last hour?
I no, you are. I think that's true.
Okay.
Yeah, on an existential level.
Cool.
Yes, that's
okay. Cool. All right. Bristol moved to the top of the Premiership in England after beating Exeter 40-35. Bath moved to 3rd after a big win over Gloucester in the West Country Derby. Leicester a 4th after toppling Northampton 24-8. That was a bit of a surprise, I must say. I mean, I know we picked that one as a game of the week. I didn't think it was going to be quite one.
Gloucester was the one where the ball fell off the tee and the guy did a drop goal. I forgot to talk about
kick
that with Wihan.
From inside the tram tracks? No problems at all. Saracens missed their chance to go back to the top, though, after Harlequins brought the 17-10 upset in the London Derby. And we sort of said there might be something a bit spicy about the London Derby, didn't we? So
it was.
There was something there. Round 6 of the top 14 in France, Bordeaux and Toulouse are 1st and 2nd after big wins.
Bordeaux was so good. That could be a proper
Perpignan and Clermont, respectively.
I think Bordeaux will be there at the business end. I think Toulouse and Bordeaux might really be a strong. Finally, I think French rugby is better when you have an actual duel instead of always being Toulouse just runs away.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. La Rochelle sit 3rd despite being thumped 37-7 by 8th placed Bayonne. That's La Rochelle just do not travel at the moment, do they? They're just
that's terrible.
Home games only. The NPC quarterfinals in New Zealand, Wellington beat Counties. I think that was expected. Bay of Plenty scored a 79th minute line-out drive, try to beat Hawke's Bay by 2.
I watched that whole flipping match. It was crazy.
Oh, that was great. Yeah. Second place, Taranaki lost 15-14 to 7th place Waikato, and that's a big win in a fierce rivalry as well. So and then 3rd place Tasman followed up a Ranfurly Shield loss to Taranaki the week before with a 62-14 quarterfinal loss to Canterbury. That's a paddling, is what that is.
Yeah,
in a quarterfinal.
Hey, those things are spicy. Those New Zealand quarterfinal derbies, people really get animalistic.
They were good.
About
they were good games. They were all good games. Semi-finals will be next Saturday, and we'll talk to them later in the week with games of the week. So make sure you're all subscribed and following as needed wherever you need to, and then you will see that. I had a couple of headlines here from the last 7 days. I think the biggest one to come out over the weekend is that former Wallabies captain Rocky Elson has been sentenced in absentia to 5 years in prison for cooking the books at Narbonne. We're talking nearly 10 years ago, aren't we?
I feel a scapegoat story here, and I think we should wait on more facts.
Yes, I'm sure.
Let's
I'm sure.
sentence
But
the
that was
Australian guy.
that was an interesting time at Narbonne. There was a heavy Australian. It was an Australian consortium that was running it at the time. There was a
Yeah,
lot.
I'm not excusing anything Rocky may or may not have done.
No,
I'm just
no.
like, I think there's more to the story. Let's wait.
Yeah. Do you have a final thought for the week?
Oh man, I want to go out and kick right now. That's what I'm all ready. I got a medium height tee. I want to approach the ball and navigate my way to the ball and smash it.
It's made me think about my golf swing, and I might have tried to do something about that later in the week. I might have tried to fix that. That's then episode 36 of the 8-9 combo behind us. It's a lengthy one. It's a meaty one, but go and check out the show notes for the links to the 8-9 combo on Twitter and YouTube, and also to Wihan's Rocketfoot Academy as well. We'll put his socials and Facebook page and things like that there. There's video versions of everything on YouTube Music as well. Leave us a rating or review wherever you can, and just tell everyone how great we are. Basically, Harry and I remain on the socials in our usual places, and you'll find links in the show notes as well to Harry's written stuff on The Roar and my weekly columns on RugbyPass, which are kind of on hold for the moment. But this is the 8-9 combo, the short side set piece combination you didn't realize you needed, coming from the podcast double act you already had. I'm Brett McKay. He's Harry Jones. And we'll be back later in the week with another edition of Games of the Week.
Come kick with us. Ding, ding, ding.